Hey guys, Veebat here with another V-Plays, and welcome back to the next iteration of the Beginner's Guide, Part 6. This is me, my tactics guide, and a couple of disclaimers up front. These are my tactics. They are subjective, but a lot of people have been telling me, hey V, I've been flying for a while, I'm getting good personal scores, I feel like I'm doing everything right, but my team keeps losing. A lot of that probably has to do with gravity of effort. It's all about getting those victory points. So in order to get those victory points, you're going to need to control the sectors in order to get those victory points. So starting out, in order for you to be able to get those victory points, here's how the math works out. You get 3 points per sector every 5 seconds, okay? The total number of victory points you need to get is dependent essentially on how many sectors you have available for capture and what tier you're at. Now, if you get air supremacy, however, like when you or the enemy team gets all of the sectors, the way they've kind of built in a mercy rule is that those 3 points per sector, instead of waiting 5 seconds, they're going to count off every single second. That's why when you see air supremacy, you just see that ticker just flying across the board. That's because if they've got 5 sites, they're getting 15 points every second. That's pretty quick. So that's why it's very important to get a sector, even if it's only one, because you're going to be reducing the timer by at least a fifth, technically more, because you're going to be removing another site, counting towards the point climbing. All right, let's talk about the sites and the order of importance. I think the mining plants are the most important site on the battlefield. This could be a source of argument for some people, but this is my opinion, and I stand by it. It's been at the core of my philosophy since I've been playing. The mining plant only gives you 3 points every 5 seconds, just like every other site. However, when the timer counts down on the mining plant, it gives you a big influx of points. That influx of points is equivalent to having 2 sites. If the mining plant is left alone, it will count as 2 sectors ticking away if it's allowed to go through its whole countdown. That's why I feel like it's so important, because it's a lot easier to defend 1 sector than it is to defend 2, but this is giving you double. The other thing is the mining plant has no defense aircraft. And this is important because that means it's hard to capture because you gotta do ground attack. You gotta have a ground attacker, a bomber, a good multi-role, maybe even a heavy that has an air-to-ground focus. That's what you need to be able to recapture or capture the mine. Otherwise, you have to wait for somebody to come into the sector, an enemy aircraft, in order for you to shoot them down to be able to get any points. The next most important site is going to be the military facility, or the missile or rocket base, as I sometimes call it, and that's because that's one of the only 2 offensive sites in the game. The military facility launches that big V2 rocket every so often, and it will destroy sections of ground target, always giving you capture points towards gaining another zone. Getting another zone equals more points, and if you were to leave a military facility alone, it will theoretically capture the entire map on its own. Command center, technically the same type of thing, right? The difference is the method, and it can be countered, okay? So the command center will release 5 bombers that have to make it all the way across the entire map. And if they make it to the other zone, and there's enough ground targets left for them to destroy, they can capture the sector. However, they can be shot down, and they take a really long time to get anywhere. So the command center still puts pressure on the enemy to either grab the command center or go after bombers or something, because if they ignore it, they're going to lose another sector. However, it's just another layer, and it makes things a little bit more difficult to try and get ahead of the enemy. While the V2 it's an unstoppable rocket. That thing goes out and you can't shoot it down. The only way to stop it is to get the military facility back. So it starts to put a lot more pressure on the enemy as they watch one of their rearward zones just getting captured, and there's nothing they can do to defend it. It's very important that I emphasize here that the military facility only has 2 defense aircraft, and they're heavy fighters. That is going to become more important when we talk about where to go and when to go places. But we'll cover that a little bit later. The command center, on the other hand, has 3 light defense fighters that are going to be operating at a lower altitude. There's two different types of airstrips, okay? There's the air base and there's the airfield. The air base is represented by the icon you see here, which looks a lot like a 262 from the top down. It's got the two engines on the wings, and this site, which I sometimes still call the airfield, even though it's an airbase or an airstrip, gives you a forward respawn location, and it has a repair section, so it'll repair your aircraft as long as they aren't taking damage or dealing damage within 20 seconds of getting inside the repair bubble. This site is defended by heavy aircraft and light defense aircraft, okay? So it can be captured simply by destroying aircraft. However, two of them are going to be heavy aircraft, so it's going to be up at a higher altitude. Airfield. Airfield is the poor man's airbase, okay? The airfield doesn't have any AA artillery that goes above low altitude, and it only has light fighters, but it has 5 of them, so it's a bit of a swarm down there. So the airfield still gives you the respawn location, but it doesn't have a repair section on it. Garrison's just points. It's going to give you those 3 points every 5 seconds. It has the 2 heavy defenders, 3 light defenders, and it has a mixture of heavy artillery and light artillery. So you're going to have to deal with a bit going into a garrison, but generally speaking, it's easier to capture because it has a lower point requirement from what I've been able to discern. And it also has a lot of things to be able to go after. You can get it through ground targets, you can get it through air targets, so it's kind of the generic site for capture. Let's talk about ground targets. We're going to talk about it a little bit because it's very important for capture because, like I said, there's some sites where you just got to destroy some ground targets. For the squares, those are representing armored targets. They're larger structures, bunkers typically, and they're going to require ordnance, either rockets, bombs, or maybe some of those really ridiculous caliber guns we see on some of the ground attack aircraft, like those 57 millimeters and stuff. They're a little bit more effective against those. But generally speaking, you're going to want to put a bomb or a rocket on one of these. The unarmored targets are going to be tents, small structures. Also, the AA guns themselves are unarmored, but you can take those out with just guns. And you see that in my ground attack videos that I just lay into those circles with the guns, and I'll save the rockets and bombs for what's ever left of the squares. The anti-aircraft artillery is represented by 2 icons. The doghouse is going to be your big old flak guns that are causing you problems up at high altitude with the big black puffs. The low altitude artillery is going to be represented by the triangles, and it's just machine gun fire, but it really adds up if you're flying straight dumb and happy, which is why I like to take those out of my ground attacker as well. How does capture work? In 2.0, when they released it, they put out the notes for it, and it said it'll take 140 capture points to grab a neutral site, or 160 capture points to be able to get it from the enemy to recapture a red site. Then, and I keep seeing that referenced over and over, even today I see that same reference, but I saw a patch note for 2.0.1, which came out shortly after 2.0, and this top section are the patch notes from 2.0.1. It stipulates that they actually changed the capture point requirements and that garrisons and staging airfields are going to be lower point requirements than it is for the mining plant, airbase, military facility, and the command center. So as a result, you can still see there's a disparity between neutral and enemy sector. However, it's going to be overall different between the two and what's required for capture. Now, have they changed that? I don't know, because I haven't seen any information different from the 2.0.1. So if anybody knows anything else, please inform me, but this is the latest information as I know it. Now, this information down in the red box, this is still pulled from the 2.0 reference, because again, I couldn't find anything specific to the capture points, but when it comes to ground targets, small ground objects, usually AA, is going to be 15 to 20 points. Medium ground targets are 20 to 50 capture points, and then large targets are 50 to 80. And the way I understand that is, I think the special structures at a site are going to be worth 80 capture points, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get further on. taking a sector by killing aircraft is going to be the primary means for most players out there, because most of us are going to be flying heavies, multi-roles, light fighters, altitude fighters, and killing aircraft is a great way to help capture a sector. Killing an air defense aircraft, and bear in mind that this icon should be a white airplane, I realize that now, I'm sorry, but killing that defense aircraft is going to give you 40 capture points, okay? So that is a perfectly viable way of capturing a zone. And I wanted to dispel a myth real quick, because I've heard people say this. They're like, oh, that defense aircraft went outside the circle, so I can't shoot it down because it won't give us any capture points. No, it still gives you the capture points. Trust me, I've tested this. If he decides he's going to be silly and chase one of your buddies and he goes too far outside the zone because he was at high airspeed or something, you can still shoot him down outside the zone and it'll give you 40 capture points. Where this doesn't hold true is when you're shooting an enemy aircraft, like one of the people on the list from the enemy team. When you shoot one of them, you can get 60 capture points, which is why they're a much more valuable target inside a sector, but they gotta be inside the circle, okay? If they leave the circle, they're not worth anything for capture. So always try to kill aircraft when they're in the sector if they're from the enemy team. Air defense aircraft, go shoot them down all the time. It doesn't matter where they are. But if you have to choose between an air defense aircraft or an enemy aircraft, the enemy aircraft's worth 50% more points. So I've said it before in my videos that I felt like that was true, and it is proven true based on the statistics that I've been seeing. Here are the indicators. Now, this is reversed a little bit. If you're defending a site, and there's a red guy in there and he might have killed one of your defense aircraft and he's getting some of the capture points, you can capture some of that back. You can reverse it, but it's only going to be 40 capture points. And again, he's got to be inside the circle in order for you to be able to do that. Wanted to talk about AA sites real quick, just real quick, down and dirty. This is a basic site layout for a AA site in the bottom left. You can see that I'm currently shooting at the triangle in the picture here, representing the actual AA gun for the low altitude AA gun. Once I destroy that triangle, that site doesn't fire anymore. This is important because if you take that out, that means that you're not getting shot by it anymore. If you take out one of the dog houses and one of the other three configurations you see on the right-hand side, that will also stop flak from hitting your bombers and your heavy fighters and your light fighters up high, and it's just going to prevent you from losing an aircraft higher up. Now, you're not going to get any capture points for just destroying the gun. You will get capture points if you destroy all of the structures inside of that area, but typically I don't really waste the time on it with my ground attackers, at least, because I don't want to have to shoot some of my rockets or drop some of my bombs just to get like 15 capture points. It's not really worth it to me. I'd rather save those ordnance for the big juicy targets I'm about to show you on the next slide. So still, I think it's worth your while to shoot up some of these AA guns. If the opportunity presents itself, if they're sitting in front of your gun, just fire at the triangle or the doghouse. If they're in your reticle, just hit the trigger, okay? I'm not saying go out of your way to go get them, but it definitely helps the other guys out there that are trying to get into that sector and do some work for ground attack. Special structures. These are the most valuable structures in each one of those sectors that we discussed before. Starting with the top left-hand picture, there's a big radar dish. That's for the command center. That is the most valuable target in that section, okay? Then you have the mine, and then on the bottom left, we have the military facility where the rockets are actually launched from, the control tower for the airfield, and then this is the largest structure at a garrison, and it has 3 hardened targets and then 3 light targets, which are unarmored targets, which are going to be these tents. So there's always going to be a mixture of heavy targets or armored targets and unarmored targets at these main structures. So if you're in a multi-role or a ground attacker, I highly advise shooting at the circles and then saving your ordnance for the squares. And now this is another important thing to consider. We're not getting any capture points unless we destroy everything inside of one of these little sections. Each section is conveniently been given a big old stone wall or cement wall around it. So that way you can identify that that is the section I need to go after. And you can see that example in all these pictures here. Every single one of those buildings needs to be destroyed in order for you to get points. This is especially important when it's neutral. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people go in and drop a couple of bombs on multiple different sites. And that's fine. They spread out the damage, cool. But they've only weakened the site. And now the enemy only needs to drop even less ordnance to be able to finish capturing the rest of that section. And I've seen somebody come in and go after a mine, and the only thing standing was a smokestack. And I saw a light fighter shoot down the smokestack and capture a bunch of the mine right out from under our nose because somebody miscalculated on their run-in. So it's very important that you make sure that you get all of a section of ground target when it's neutral, especially. When it's already captured by the enemy, they can't destroy their own structures, so it's still helpful to drop on red targets even if it's not going to finish it off. But it is going to behoove you when it is neutral to try and get as much of that site as you possibly can. Here's another thing to consider as well, guys. So I mentioned before, using guns to go after some of the light structures, the unarmored structures first, because let's say that this is the overall hit bar of one of these sites, okay? The number of hit points in that whole section. And my bombs, I got a 500-pound bomb that will essentially damage everything inside that square with its blast radius. The damage from the bomb will be spread across all of the targets inside of that sector. If I remove 3 of those targets, now when I drop my bomb, it will destroy all 3 of those buildings. While if I don't shoot it at all and I drop my single bomb, there is a strong potential that you can see the bracket here. I will not be able to get all of it and I will leave some of the site behind. So I like to shoot some of the targets up first before I drop my bombs. That way I can ensure that I get the capture. Just tactically speaking, I think that that's a good move and just a recommendation for any of you guys out there. Now, I wanted to go over some examples and things I would do if I were to hop into a battle. Where would I go? What would I do? And I wanted to give you some examples that might be fitting for some of the earlier players, for some of the earlier tier maps. This is going to be the Arctic. And then we'll go into some higher tier decision making as well as the sites get a little bit more complicated. Now, I've already said what I think my rank of importance is. So based on that, what's the most important site on the map? The airfield, right? The air base. Again, I said I misspeak, but the air base is the most important. Well, I don't feel as though it's more important than a mine or a command center or a military facility. It's still going to give us a respawn point. It's going to give us repair. So piling on in the middle isn't a bad move, but there's still 2 other sites. So if the enemy got both garrisons and we maintained the airfield the whole battle, we'd still lose. Okay. And this is a typical scenario where I've seen people like show me some battles and they're like, man, I got an ace, I got 20,000 personal points and we still lost because you spent the entire time over the airfield killing every aircraft that came in that was dumb enough to fly into your entire team, while the ground attackers, multi-roles, bombers split up and went and got those garrisons and held on to them for the whole match and ended up getting double your point score. Because it's all about getting the victory points. That's just the way this game is played. So personal points are great, but they're not necessarily going to give you the victory. So while I might be going to the airfield, if I'm in a light turn fighter or even an altitude or a heavy, because there's still going to be 2 heavy defenders, right? I'll go in there and I'll take out those aircraft and I'll try and help out to get the zone. But I would F2, which is, telling your bots and your team to go after a certain sector, I would F2 the closest garrison. So if we spawn in this lower location, I would F2 this garrison, making sure that my team was putting a gravity of effort over there for the ground attackers and the bombers. While I would go with the rest of my team. If I was in a multi-role light fighter, whatever, I would go over to the military or to the air base to try and help capture the central structure. And once we got the air base, maybe I wouldn't stay, especially if I was a heavy. If I was a heavy, I'd probably leave and I'd go counter bombers, and I might come back. I'd keep an eye on it because the airfield's still important, but it wouldn't be my whole focus. So just a recommendation there, that don't get glued to one site. Now let's add a layer of complication. Now there's more garrisons. Same rules apply, guys. The garrisons are still going to be giving you way more points than the airfield is if you get both garrisons on your side of the map. They're going to give you 6 points instead of just 3 points that the airfield will give you. So it will eventually devolve to a fight over the airfield, but I have seen people win this map and never capture the airfield. I was in a bomber one time and I just ran the circuit and I just captured 3 of their garrisons. And while they might get one back, I would just go back and recapture the other one again. So we always had 3 sites, even though we never got the airfield in the middle. And I had some people on my team screaming that we needed the airfield. We didn't need the airfield. We could get 3 of those garrisons for the entire match and maintain control of the battlefield. But I would still approach this the same way we did the last example. I would put a gravity of effort on one of the garrisons, I would go to the air base, and then we would try and get the other garrison as well. And if I found myself in a situation where I was in an aircraft that I was in a multi-role and they had a whole bunch of turn fighters human controlled, I might not go to the airfield at all. I might go and capture a garrison because that's more what a multi-role is meant to do. So you can diversify your efforts here and still get a good, honest effort. But pay attention to how many sites are being controlled and where the enemy's team is moving, where your team is moving as a cluster. Don't get caught out alone and try and maintain the advantage of sectors. Now let's make it a little bit more complicated. Now we've got one of those sites that I feel is the second most important site in the game. There's only 2 heavy aircraft at a command center, okay? Sending all of your aircraft, all of your counter-air aircraft, your fighters, your heavy fighters, your multi-roles, all over to a military facility is a silly endeavor. There's going to be 2 heavy fighters at high altitude, most likely going after your bombers. I would go to the southern sector if I was starting in the green site because it's closest, and I would defend my bombers with a heavy or maybe a light fighter. But if I was in a turn fighter, I'd still be going to the middle. If I was a multi-role, I would drop my ordnance at the military facility, but I'd probably skedaddle and go after the airfield as well. The point here is that while a military facility is important, you still need to play to the role of your aircraft a little bit here, because it does have 2 altitude defenders. There's going to be 5 low altitude light defenders at the airfield. So get in there with your turn fighters, maybe a multi-role kind of working on the periphery, or altitude fighter, coaxing some of those light fighters up to higher altitude and killing them at a low energy state. Those are things you can do at the airfield. But you do need a military facility, so you have to keep an eye on it and make sure that you get yours. Because if the enemy gets both, you're going to be in a real tough spot, because they're going to start lobbing into the airfield and taking out some ground targets and countering the capture. But getting the airfield, getting the military facility is going to be important. If the enemy does manage to get the airfield, go for their military facility and try and flip that while the airfield's on a cooldown, because human nature is everyone wants to go to the center of the map. So take advantage of that, and I've seen people win just by capturing both military facilities, and it ends up capturing the airfield just through rockets alone. Ooh, here's another complicated one. So mining facilities are very important. However, a mining facility has no air defense aircraft. And since we each have our own mining plant, there's not going to be anybody there for us to shoot down at our mining plant when we first start. Okay? So there's not much for me to do here. I would still F2 this, and it will automatically, if you F2 a mine, the bots will either be a bomber or a ground attacker, will acknowledge it and go over there. It won't be a heavy or a turn fighter. The game is smart enough not to send, zero over to a mining facility to try and shoot up ground targets. That would be dumb. So, again, I wouldn't go there unless I was, maybe I could, if I had a multi-role that was more air-to-ground focused, like one of the P-47 lines, or maybe one of the British multi-role lines, I might go to the mining facility and drop my ordnance. But primarily, I would leave that to the ground attackers and the bombers. What I would most likely do is, this is a perfect opportunity for a multi-role to shine because they're great at flipping garrisons. So in my multi-role, I would probably go down south towards that garrison. And if I was in a heavy, I would kill some of the altitude fighters over the garrison, but I would immediately jog over to their mining facility, their mining plant, and try and counter their bombers. Because then you can stall their efforts in getting this zone. Because if you control your mine and you control this garrison, and the enemy is delayed in getting this, or doesn't capture it at all, it doesn't matter if they get the airfield and the garrison. Those are only 2 points to what's equivalent to 1, 2, 3 zones for you. And you're countering the mining plant, so you're just holding them in delay. And if you can start getting your ticker to count over before they get their ticker to count over, you're going to maintain an advantage. And then it's just going to be a fight over the airfield, which, by the way, your bombers are going to haphazardly go straight across here if you F2 the mine. So just be aware that if you tell them to come over here right after capturing your mine, they're going to be right in the crosshairs of anything fighting over the airfield in this case. So that was low tier stuff. Let's go high tier, because high tier tends to have a lot more stuff. And this is a prime example of it. We've got 2 mining facilities. We've got a military facility. We've got 2 airfields. There's a lot of good juicy stuff here. But again, we have 2 mining plants. With 2 mining plants, I can't do anything at that mining plant that's really going to be that effective. So just like the last match, I'm actually going to send my bombers and ground attackers over there. I'll F2 it. But I'm going to make my way towards the military facility, and I might hit F3 that'll call for assistance so I can get another counter aircraft to help me out. And there's going to be 2 heavy defenders, and that's it. However, human nature, the enemy is going to come into the middle as well, and it's just going to be a clash, and typically at higher altitude. So this is going to be a situation that favors altitude fighters. It's also going to favor heavy fighters initially, because that's where all the action's going to be. But at the same time, the multi-rolls can drop down and drop ordnance on some of the ground targets, and they may even find a human ground attacker that went towards the central site that they can counter as well. The airfields on this map, I feel, are so tertiary. They're not important, because what I'm really worried about is these 2 sites. If I can control these 2 sites, I have 3 zones essentially. And one of those zones is going to be actively capturing enemy sites. So if I can maintain control of the military facility, I will eventually capture their mine or their airfield. What advantage do I get from getting my airfield? A closer spawn to a zone that I can't even do anything with. I can't do anything at a mine unless I'm a bomber or a ground attacker. But as a bomber and a ground attacker, I'm not the one taking the airfield, am I? So it makes sense to put all of your effort on these 2 sites. And the same thing from this angle as well. The airfields, they're just not worth it. Eventually they'll get captured. The bots will do something about it, whatever. But if I can get that military facility, it's going to mean the world. Whoop. Now let's remove the military facility from the equation whatsoever. And this is an interesting one, because I feel like this is a weird setup, but I can tell you that I've been playing long enough that I've noticed that even humans do this, that the bombers will go to what is essentially your mine. Now, these spawns are actually a little bit messed up. The red spawn is actually back here, and the green spawn is over here now. But what that means is you're going to start over on this side, they'll start on this side. So this is their sectors. These are your sectors. It seems a little bit odd because it's all the way on the other side of the map. But the enemy bombers, for whatever reason, will come straight across and try and go after your mine. That's beneficial. What that means is that if you're an altitude fighter or a heavy, you can go straight up here. I avoid the flak and I intercept the bombers right about here, and I will cause them damage and wait until they get inside the circle and then destroy them, and it gives you some capture towards the mine. Getting this mine is paramount, but you're probably going to get fed some targets early on. And if it turns out that the enemy isn't there, let's say you fly all the way up and the enemy never shows up, that's cool. That just means that your ground attackers and multi-rolls have an unencumbered attack on the mining facility. Now I can just dart over and grab the airfield, because the airfield is still going to be worth 3 points. And as a spawn location that's going to be close to defending your mining plant, it is going to be beneficial. But once you get these two sectors, then you're going to start working your way across to the other mining plants, to the enemy's mining plant. And whoever captures the other's mining plant first essentially is determined who's going to be the victor of this battle. Now, it's not set in stone, obviously. There's always something you can do, but generally speaking, that's the rule of thumb. So I try to achieve that condition as soon as possible, whether that is clearing the way for my bombers and attack aircraft or countering their bombers and attack aircraft as they're coming over to our military facility. Or mining plants, sorry. But that's the logic I like to play on. Now, there's also this version of the map as well. And on this version of the map, it's pretty obvious what the focus is going to be. It's going to be pile on the middle, okay? Now, if I'm a multi-roll though, I have found working the periphery is going to be my best bet. If I'm in a bomber and I'm a really good bomber pilot or even a ground attacker, I have been able to win this map by maintaining 3 of the garrisons continuously, even though I'm fighting against a military facility that's constantly going to be shooting out rockets. I will have the ability to out-cap it in most cases. But I would prefer not to go into the middle with my bomber while the furball is going on. I will leave that to the altitude fighters, to the heavies, to get in there and do the tussle. It doesn't mean a bomber can't go in there, and it doesn't mean I haven't done it where I've gone headstrong in a bomber straight into the military facility. But I'm just saying there's options to do another tactic here, but you're going to need to be very confident and very quick at being able to flip these garrisons very readily. Otherwise, your main focus is typically just going to be going for the military facility because, again, it's an offensive site, and I've already given you the hierarchy of importance. For this setup, the mine's the most important thing. But this is kind of a weird one, and I'm kind of I'm tipping my hat as to what I like to do here. I will F2 the mining plant. We've already talked about this. Send the bombers, send the ground attackers off to the mining facility. If I'm in a counter-air aircraft, altitude fighter, multi-role, heavy fighter, I'm going to make a hard right. I'm going to go into this garrison down here. I'm going to kill 1, maybe 2 aircraft, and then I'm going to go counter the enemy bombers and ground attackers over at their military or their mining plant. I don't know why I keep doing that, but I go to their mining plant and I'm going to try and counter them because, again, this is going to be a lot like the other mining plant battle. It's whoever gets both mining plants first is essentially going to be the one who's going to have the upper hand. So that's my logic here. That's generally the way that I approach going into battles, guys. It's deciding what I can do at a site and whether or not there's going to be any targets for me. So by the time in this particular example I finished with this garrison, I know bombers and ground attackers are going to be at the mining plant for me to go after, and that's a viable target for me. Now, we didn't talk about command centers, and I'm realizing that now, but let's, for the sake of argument, say that the center was a command center to go after. The advantage for that is that we know that it has 3 low altitude fighters. That means that it opens up the aircraft that are going to be more viable in that location to your low altitude turn fighters. Your low altitude turn fighters are going to be of limited utility in this central zone unless the enemy also brings low altitude turn fighters or multi-rolls into that sector for you to be able to counter. Otherwise, everything's going to be happening so far above your head that you're just not going to have the energy or the oomph to be able to get up there to do anything. But the command centers just give you that extra latitude to be able to go after some of those lighter fighters. So just something to consider. Anyways, I hope this helps some of you guys out, because I know that there's been a few people I've talked to in the past that I've given them my theory on this, and it's actually helped their win percentage drastically. I know Commander Viper, he originally came to Ace with the same type of issues. He was showing me some really good footage of him getting 14 to 20,000 personal point battles, but he was suffering low win rates, and it was just because of gravity of effort. And after working with him for a little bit and just giving him some good examples, or having Ace work with him, I guess, he's ended up upping his win percentage well over 60% at this point, when he was sitting below 50% initially. So he's talked about this before, and he was happy to talk about it again, so I'm not outing him. Hopefully he doesn't mind, but that's the general idea and what I'm trying to achieve here with this video. So I hope this helps some of you guys out. A little bit longer, no gameplay, kind of bland, a lot of me talking and some PowerPoint slides. But again, I feel like it's important to start getting more into the tactics at this stage, and this should help your gameplay. So as always, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next one.